Welcome to another episode of Crawfordsville Connection, the City of Crawfordsville's weekly podcast that comes out every Monday morning. I'm your host, Sarah Summer, and I'm joined in the studio every week with Mayor Todd Barton to keep our community up to date on current events, city workings, and to hear from community members on a variety of topics. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed the show. Welcome back to another episode of Crawfordsville Connection. I'm your host, Sarah Summer, and today I'm joined in the studio on a whim with Mayor Todd Barton.
This is not just another episode.
Right, it's
Sarah.
Not just another episode.
This is a special episode.
A special breaking news episode.
Breaking news. We've always said if we had breaking news, we'd do an episode, and we haven't really done that. So we're going to do it this time.
Yes, the first of maybe many.
I don't know. I don't know. This is a pretty big one, so we decided to do an episode.
Yes.
Yeah, good to be here.
Yes, and with us we have Brandy as well.
Hello.
Hello. And we don't have any announcements because this is the announcement.
This is the announcement.
Okay. What is it, Mayor?
So we, as we're recording, just shortly, a little bit ago, we released a news release and posted to social media that the City of Crawfordsville has been awarded a grant from the Federal Railroad Administration through the USDOT for a Market Street Rail Crossing Elimination project.
Yes.
Yes.
It's a mouthful.
It's a planning grant. It is a mouthful, and every word matters in that assembly of words there. This is a planning grant to get us through planning and development to eliminate that crossing with what's called a grade separation. And everyone says, why do you call it that? That's just the correct terminology that we're required to use.
Right.
Everybody will refer to it as an overpass, but it is a grade separation. So separating the rail from the roadway.
Yes.
And so this is the money to go through the planning process and develop and get us all the way up to where we could be ready to move forward with construction. And I think the important thing to understand here, a couple things. This is a very complex scenario, so you have to go through the planning process. And you can apply just for the construction funding. The chances of getting it without going through planning are pretty slim.
Mm-hmm.
And so this really prepares us to apply for the actual construction funding.
Okay.
So this is not the money to build an overpass. It's the step to get us there.
Yes.
Yes.
And you mentioned that it's federal funding. How is this funded?
So this is funded through USDOT, as I said. This is a kind of an anomaly in the grant world in that this comes directly from the federal level to the city level. It doesn't flow through state government. So most of our grants come through the feds, through the state, some state agency, and then to the locals. This is one that is directly from the federal side of things.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
we've been talking about this forever. Like, we're applying for this.
Yes, we've been talking in our general updates. And first we were collecting data, and then we waited and waited and waited to be able to even apply.
And then we were able to apply. And then we were told, look, change in administrations, things have really slowed down. We don't know when they'll make some decisions. And then we randomly were notified.
Yeah.
And we were shocked.
A good surprise.
Yes, a good surprise.
Yes.
A very good surprise. So I honestly didn't think we would get notified yet. And either way. And here we are.
It's awesome.
We just found out a few days ago, and we wanted to get our ducks in a row, so to speak, and then get ready for the announcement.
Yeah. So now that we have been awarded this grant, what happens next?
So I think that's the part that may be a little confusing for people. So just to clarify, this planning grant will be used to basically put our plan together so that we would be ready to construct a separation there. So this is very involved because, as many people probably know, this is not a city street. This is several state highways. And so we have state highway right-of-way issues to navigate. It's obviously over the railroad. So we also have railroad right-of-way to navigate. So we really will have to work closely with those two organizations to put together a plan. Obviously, in this area, there's a lot of factors, I guess, that would have to be, we'll have to just look for solutions. So basically, we're studying that area, identifying a solution, and then we will put together a plan to apply for funds to be able to construct. And if we are awarded those funds, we'll be ready to go. We'll have the plans all the way completed. So this takes us all the way up through that process, which involves working with several groups and, the experts that know how to construct these things. So
sounds easy to say we're going to put an overpass there, but when you think about it, there's a lot of properties around there, a lot of businesses, buildings. There's a lot to think through, even our streets, right?
Yeah.
How do we tie our existing streets and into this? So there's a lot of planning has to take place. And, it's easy to say, well, you should have been doing that all along, but this is far too complex we have to bring in traffic engineers and the engineers who will design the bridge. You have to bring all those folks to the table to really work through this. And this is something that will affect our community for forever, right? So we have to get it right. And so that's why we're doing the planning process.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, it's an involved planning process. We've already seen some questions on social media saying, okay, you're going to use all this money to sit in a room and talk and make plans, and throw out ideas. And it's more than that.
Yeah, it's hiring professionals that understand this and how do we do it and get it right. Designing a rail overpass is not an easy proposition, I'm sure. And designing one in the heart of a city is probably even far more complicated.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So this grant, we talked about how involved it is. How much is this grant? How much does it cost to make a plan for something like this?
A lot.
A lot of money.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about going through this process, there's a lot of steps that have to occur. And, thinking through design, we went through on Purple Heart and projects like that, which weren't near as complicated as this, it adds up quickly. And so that was all spelled out in our application and what we were awarded. The total project for this planning is $1.6 million to get us up to that point. Okay, so a lot involved there. What we agreed to in this application is that we would match that 30%. So of that 1.6, 30% of that will come from local funds.
Okay.
And you might wonder how we came up with the 30% number. And I'll tell you, like in these grant applications, you have to commit 20% at least, right? And what I know from that world is if you're only putting in 20%, your chances of getting funded are diminished, let's say, right?
Yeah.
The higher you increase that percent, the more likely you are. And if you have to look at it from their perspective, right? We're saying in our narrative, this is a critically important issue to our community that we need to get resolved, but we're only going to put in the minimum.
Right.
They're going to look at that and say, well, it's not that important to you, right? So we upped that, I think, in the minds of the evaluators and the people scoring this, 30% is kind of a magic number, and that's how we got there. Now, where's that money coming from? We had to spell that out in our application as well, and we're going to use tax increment financing or TIF funding to supply this. So basically, money from business taxes on industries that we are going to set aside and pull in there for this. Why are we doing that? Because we heard very loud and clear in our process, to prepare for this, that this is really important to our industries. Right. If you think about deliveries going to our factories and a semi truck gets stuck there for 4 hours, it has a huge effect. And so we will pull that money aside to dedicate to our match for this project. But the total project is $1.6 million to get us up to that point where we have detailed plans and ready to go and can apply for construction.
Awesome. So once we have all of this planning done, the construction will happen. But up to that point, what is the timeline for the planning?
Sure. Well, obviously, this process is not going to happen overnight. So there's a lot of work to be done, and we basically have to start now so that we can make the timelines. But our goal is to be ready to make a request for funding in the fiscal year 26 round of funding. So we are looking at doing all of this work and all of this prep to basically complete in the fall of 2026. So little over a year and a half.
For construction funding.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Sorry. So that's what we're preparing for, is to be able to apply hopefully in that fiscal year.
Right.
And then, so this process will take a little over a year and a half. And then if we're awarded, obviously there will be, a longer construction period as well. These things are just, it's a major project that will take some time. So, as we know from watching this process, this is all speculation. We don't know exactly when those, grant rounds will be released and all of these things. So, that's what we're hoping for and planning for. But obviously it will be up to those timelines and when those funding opportunities are issued from the federal government. But if we were able to be awarded, then it may take another couple of years to actually construct this. So we're looking at a long-term project here.
At least.
Yes.
Probably at least a couple of years. And kind of the next steps for us is, we have to hire a consulting firm to do this work, professional engineers to do this. So Brandy and I will be participating in some information sessions with the federal side. So we understand what, we need to be doing, and then we'll start that process of selecting a firm to work on this project for us. So a lot of things have to happen here in kind of a short amount of time.
Right.
So we're excited, but also we know it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for us, this is a huge announcement, but really, what is the significance of this project? What's the significance of that crossing for us in our community?
I don't even know how to put it into words. I mean, that issue is one of the biggest issues facing our community and has been for decades. Um, and you have to think about what happens there. We have 3 state highways coming together at a choke point with a rail crossing that not only is very busy with trains moving through, but has a recurring problem with trains stalling and stopping there. It just happened in the last few days, right? And being stuck for hours. And so we have this really compounding problem right there. And the way our community is laid out, there aren't a lot of other options. We have the Wabash Avenue Bridge. Not everybody can get to that, especially semis. And, if you think about east and west side of Crawfordsville, there are just a few places you can get
right
across town, really. So this area, this is really an important issue to us. And I think that's where we've struggled for years is we know it's important to us. I know it's important to this community. Believe me, I hear it a lot. But trying to convince somebody in Indianapolis or in Washington, D.C. that this is an important issue has been really, really tough.
Yeah.
And that's why we really changed how we did this time in this application and went to a data approach.
Yeah. The
data told the story. We can talk about people in Crawfordsville being inconvenienced, and that doesn't resonate very well with, somebody somewhere else. But when we showed them the data, it made a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of that data that we collected was how many vehicles per day are crossing.
Yeah, I think that surprises people. If you look at that crossing, and this is NDOT's data, 16,492 vehicles cross that crossing a day on average.
That's crazy.
That's a crazy number of vehicles.
Yeah.
And 9% of those, just shy of 10% of those are large trucks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those are the ones that really, really get stuck when there's a blocked crossing. I was talking to someone earlier and they said, some of those semis will sit there for hours. I feel bad for the driver. Like they can't leave their truck and they can't go anywhere. They can't turn around. They're stuck. And think about what happened, a week ago. We had, I don't know how many hours that ended up being, 5 hours, something like that. So yeah, that's the traffic side of it. 16,492 vehicles a day across that crossing on average.
And this crossing presents a number of different challenges. Do you want to talk about some of those?
Yeah. So, I mean, you have the issue with the trains moving through, and there's a lot more train traffic there than I think people realize. The bigger issue is the stopped trains. And so I've always been rather amused when I'm with other mayors in other cities and they talk about the trains in their community and they have so many trains a day. And, you have to sit at a crossing for 10 minutes and wait for a train to clear. And I'm like, that's okay. That's nothing, right?
Right.
We have hours and hours on end where they just sit there. So you have the stop trains, which is the bigger issue. We also have a problem in that area with pedestrians and trains. People crossing in front of trains, going around the gates. And we've discovered as part of this study that people use the rail line as a path itself. So we have people that walk up the rail line to get to, Whitlock Avenue and Kentucky Street and those areas, Reisner Street, some of those, and which is incredibly dangerous. And we actually, during our study period, there was a fatality of a pedestrian walking on the rail line in that area. So that's part of the issue. And then, of course, we've wrestled for decades with emergency vehicles and that crossing. Countless times where there's an emergency and emergency vehicles have to go around, and lose precious minutes.
Right.
A few years ago, we built new fire station number 2 on the east side. And I was always asked if that was really necessary. Couldn't we put it all together in one? And the answer was, we probably could have looked at that, but with the rail line, it's not even an option. You have to spread your resources on both sides of that rail line to protect everything. So a lot of different things happening there. And those are things we looked at in the study. We'll talk about that in a minute. But that pedestrian piece is what surprised me. I wasn't surprised by the stop trains or the emergency vehicle interactions. I knew that happened. But the number of pedestrians using that rail line or walking out in front of trains, we have some unbelievable footage that we shared with the railroad of a pedestrian literally just getting out of the way at the last split second and avoiding being struck. So it's a really big problem in that area.
Yeah, and people were even, when the train is stopped, crawling over trains.
Crawling through trains. I have
Right.
seen that, and we've had footage of that. They get frustrated and they climb through. And if that train starts to move at that time, I mean, that's a violent, those first few seconds are very violent. It's very dangerous.
Yeah.
So
scary stuff. And some of the different railroad factors, there's the grade difference, they switch lines, there's signals, what's going on there?
Yeah, we get asked that a lot. Like, why does this problem happen in Crawfordsville and not so much elsewhere? And this problem does happen elsewhere, but it is worse in Crawfordsville, I think. There's a variety of factors coming together. Most people don't realize, and I didn't know this, until years ago, but there is a considerable grade difference in Crawfordsville. So if you think about a train going south through Crawfordsville and it crosses the Sugar Creek Bridge out by the Boys and Girls Club, by the time it gets to the south side of Crawfordsville, it's climbing several hundred feet. For a train, that is a lot.
Yeah.
And so they're trying to climb up a hill when they're going south. At the same time, the railroads merged years ago, and they're basically switching rail lines. And so they're making a really strange curve, which also makes it harder for them. The railroad has fixed that somewhat. It's better than it used to be, but it's still an issue. They're trying to climb up a hill and make a turn at the same time, which causes problems. And because they're switching lines, they have to have the clearance to get on that other line. And that was sometimes the issue. So they would be going south. They need to get on the line to go towards Indianapolis, and they don't have a signal telling the green light, basically telling them they can do that. They had to stop. And if they stopped on that hill, they're not starting again until they get help. So all those things were kind of coming together. Another factor in Crawfordsville, which is really kind of strange, we are in two different CSX divisions. Part of our lines in Crawfordsville are in the Great Lakes Division, part are in the Chicago Division. So a train can be moving around in Crawfordsville. It has to be handed off from one division to the other.
Wow.
That doesn't make sense to most people, but that is what we deal with in Crawfordsville. So
interesting.
Yeah.
So did the problem really get worse in 1999?
It did. And I got asked that question earlier today, like, what in the world? This has always been a problem in Crawfordsville, and that's not entirely true. We've always had trains. You always had to sit and wait on a train coming through. I remember when I was younger, you would sit and wait on a train come through, and you might be at the crossing, like I said earlier, 10, 15 minutes, and that was inconvenient. But in 1999, there was a merger of railroads, and that's when we saw a change in how trains come through here. So instead of going straight from north to south and coming through Crawfordsville and going down towards Ladoga, now all of a sudden they were going south, coming into Crawfordsville, and having to switch lines and going towards Indianapolis. And when that happened, that's when our problems really started to really get bad. That's when trains started to stall and stop and everything else. So pre-1999, yes, we had some issues, but after 1999, it has gotten much, much worse. And that's where we've seen the blockages for 4, 5, 6 hours at a time. Yeah.
So people say this should have been done so long ago.
They should have done this.
Yeah, they should have done it. Somebody, right?
Yeah.
Somebody should have done something. What has the city attempted to do to address this in the past?
Yeah, and we spell this out in the press release that went out today. I thought that was important for people to have that information. A few years ago, Indiana had a program called Local Tracks, which was designed to eliminate this kind of issue and create overpasses. We applied at that time and was not successful. At that time, the advice from NDOT was that we should apply at the federal level. And so we applied twice for what's called a build grant at the federal level. And obviously that was not funded either time.
Right.
I think at the second time we applied, we were given like an exit interview type of meeting with them. It was virtual, and got a lot of feedback about why they didn't fund our application. And as I said earlier, it's really hard to convince someone sitting in Washington, D.C. that this is a really big problem in Crawfordsville, Indiana, right? And so that was the takeaway for me. Like, we have to change how we're doing this. We're going to have to go to data, because I can be as passionate as I want about the problem in Crawfordsville. It's not going to resonate with them.
Right.
So we really rethought it after that. So those are kind of the steps we went through. And then we saw this opportunity coming and really tried to prepare ourselves very early. We've spent almost 2 years collecting data to get ready for this. So it was a very methodical process to get us to this point. But we have tried to address it several times, just not successfully. And I think, like everything else we've done, we learned from each one of those.
So, you talked about collecting data. Some of the ways you've done that is with the video monitoring. What other ways have you collected the data?
Yeah, video monitoring is the big one, right? And the video doesn't lie. I mean,
Right.
and it doesn't blink for the most part. Occasionally it breaks down and it blinks. But
Small blip.
yeah, but no, that's been the biggest thing, right? And what we found in our previous applications, we had to rely on the data we were being given, which said there's 1 train a day, 2 trains a day, not a problem. I'm like, that is not true. There's no way that data is accurate.
Wow.
When we put the cameras on there and collected data ourselves, it told a different story.
Yeah.
And it was just putting all of that together, which was not easy, right? I mean, you have to every day go through all that and find out how many trains and how many minutes, measure the time, watch for pedestrian interactions, all that kind of stuff. So
it's a lot.
There's a lot involved in collecting that kind of data, but that was really the biggest piece. And then, we also relied on accident reports, from the law enforcement side. Reports from emergency responders and incidents where they were, we monitored for situations where ambulances had to be diverted, fire trucks had to be diverted, those kind of things as well. Yeah.
So, we'll get the question, isn't it illegal for trains to block that crossing?
Yeah. That question has started to kind of go away. I used to get that a lot. Like people would be upset, like, you just need to send the police down there and arrest them. Well, we can't. Okay, that's the bottom line. Indiana used to have a law regulating the amount of time a train could block a crossing. And a few years ago, the Indiana Supreme Court struck that law down, and we no longer have a law. So we went from a weak law to no law. How's that? Yeah. And the premise behind that is that local government can't interfere with interstate commerce, and trains are interstate commerce. So when there is a train blocking, and let's say it's stopped, what typically happens is, there may be people calling into the dispatch center here. There may be officers calling in. Our 911 dispatch center usually make contact with the railroad to try to find out what's going on. The reality is they really don't have to tell us anything. Sometimes they do. Sometimes, we get information. We have a timeline. We know what's going to happen. Sometimes we send police officers to talk to the train crew so we can get it right direct, like what's going on, how long are you going to be, that kind of thing. And that's kind of how we get our information, but we cannot go issue a ticket or whatever. And the city of Crawfordsville had done that for decades under that old law.
Yeah.
And I researched that. You know how many fines the railroad had paid on all those tickets?
Oh.
Zero. Zero over the years.
Yeah.
Not a single one. We issued the tickets. It was what it was. But under that previous law, if it was caused by a mechanical issue, they could get it exempted. Well, every time they stopped, it was a mechanical issue, I guess. So they had paid nothing over the years. So no, we have no legal authority. Now, obviously, we can communicate with them, and we do. And, time's money for them, too. They don't want to be sitting there. So they're going to try to get the problem resolved. But it's very frustrating for everybody.
Yeah.
Mayor Barton touched on something there, and it doesn't answer the question that you asked. But I think it's important to point out some of the things that people don't even think about, aside from, just being inconvenienced by the train, is the impact on 911 and the public safety when a train is stopped. Like if there's someone that's having an actual emergency, we have officers tied up trying to direct traffic around town. We have all these calls coming into 911, kind of clogging up the system. So that's another huge impact that it's not even something that would initially register to you, but the impact on public safety of a train is much more than just if a police or a fire vehicle need to cross the tracks. So
Yeah, and we do have, as part of that camera system, that was one of the first things I did as mayor, having been a responder. We put the camera on the crossing so that our 911 center and our emergency responders would know when it's blocked, because previously you didn't know.
Right.
So if you think about coming out of the fire station downtown in a ladder truck and getting to Water Street down to Market, and there's a train, now I have to go all the way over to Washington, back down to Wabash, and then get to Wabash and deal with the traffic. Where if I knew that before I left, it would make it easier. So we installed that camera all those years ago, and it's helped the emergency responder situation, but it still throws us off because, an ambulance might be going from the east side to the hospital in an emergency, and that train comes as they're, wasn't there sitting. It comes as they approach that area, and they have to turn around and go around.
Yeah.
So, and that's not an easy process with a patient in the back. You have somebody back there working, you have all these things happening, turning around and going down side streets is not an ideal solution.
Right.
Yeah. So, a lot of things come together there.
So you've mentioned that the approach to this grant has been different, and that's, all based on data.
Yeah.
What was the timeline like for collecting all of the data and making sure that we had robust enough information that would make, the data compelling and it would tell the true story?
Yeah, we started collecting data on September 19th of 22 and went all the way through July 31st of 24.
Wow.
And there were some periods there where we had trouble with the camera, so it wasn't complete that whole time. But yeah, that's a pretty big window of time. And we wanted to get through all the seasons. Train traffic changes a little bit throughout the year. I mean, harvest season, you'll see more of the grain stuff, that kind of thing. So we wanted to incorporate all of that as well. But yeah, pretty long period of time to study this.
And for that period, we have every interaction with an emergency vehicle, every interaction with a pedestrian. We know every single time there was a maintenance truck on the tracks. We know, every single cargo train or passenger train. So the data is just that much more real. I mean, we have very detailed information that could help us kind of put dollars to, when that down to the minute, when that crossing was blocked, it's a lot easier to estimate the impact on the community.
So that study period was 681 days. There were actually 654 that we ended up with when we took out the ones where we lost the data because of the cameras. In that period, there were 3,801 freight trains passed through that intersection. Wow. It's kind of mind-boggling.
That's more than one a day.
That is
they were telling
definitely more than one a day, and that's off the camera, folks. I mean, it is what it is. It's right there. 538 passenger trains, which that number is lower than it would have been years ago. We have passenger trains 3 days a week now. It used to be 7, so that would have been higher. Now, we never really had trouble with passenger trains blocking the crossing. Those are through. They're short. They're quick. It's never really an issue. But 538 of those. Track maintenance vehicles, like Brandy mentioned, 431. Those are usually quick as well. It's usually one vehicle that passes through. This was the surprising part. Pedestrian interactions with trains that were caught on camera 148 times.
Wow.
148 times. Very, very dangerous, including, as I said earlier, a fatality caught in that study period as well. Interactions between emergency vehicles and trains, 89 times. So those are the ones I'm talking about where they're coming and here comes a train and they have to reroute, that kind of thing. Those are not the ones where they knew when they left the station they had to go around.
Right.
That never got caught on camera. So 89 interactions with emergency vehicles. We had 5 other miscellaneous types of events. So a total of 5,012 events recorded in that time period.
Wow.
The average blockage for that crossing, it varied. It was really strange. Some months were really low, like 4 or 5 hours. Some months were high, 17 hours. But it averaged out to about 42 minutes a day. Now, here's the interesting thing. During that study period, we didn't have too many of those really long blockages. It just fell that way. I'm like, we're studying this, and this is the data. And I hate to say this is a kind of a good time. We're not having the really bad situations. They were kind of before this study period, and we've had some since then. So those numbers would have been thrown off a lot more because 42 minutes a day, and like last week we were close. It was close
hours,
for hours just in one day. So, but that's what that looked like.
So, you threw out a lot of numbers, and I mean, it shows obviously there's a lot of stuff happening there. But how do you quantify the impact of those, the number of interactions with the train? How do you quantify that, and what does that cost for the community? Because like you said, time is money. And so all of this ends up, there's got to be something that shows this is what it costs for the train to be blocking us.
Well, and conveniently for us, the federal government has a formula. I mean, they've already assigned a cost to that for their own purposes, which we were able to use and put with our data and show the true impact of the community. So we know the value of that travel time. I mean, they identified that as personal time of $16.20 an hour and business time is $29.40 an hour. So when you multiply that across the number of days that we have and the number of hours that it was blocked, that's what Mayor Barton was referring to. You get that average delay time of 42 minutes a day. And that you take that calculation and show that we had an approximate impact of $7,315.27 a day. And for our entire study period, $4,784,184.88 in the study period.
Yeah.
Wow.
Just of the, the travel time, the savings of people that are stuck in that traffic if they could have been doing what they needed to be doing. That's an annual impact of over $2.6 million a year.
Wow.
Yeah, if you broke it down per year, 2.6, almost 2.7
Yeah.
of lost productivity for businesses and individuals.
Right.
Yep.
And this doesn't even calculate, a truck that ends up sitting there and ultimately they can't deliver goods to a business and the loss of
they're
product.
included in the
That's
business
included
side.
in that.
Yeah. Based on the, like we said earlier, that almost 10% of those vehicles were trucks.
Okay.
Yeah. So that you calculate those differently than you do the cars.
Okay.
So there's the personal rate and the business rate. Yeah. Yeah. Staggering numbers when you put it together and you look at it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's an impact to our businesses and the people of this community.
It is.
Yeah.
And along with, this dollar amount and the impact for cost, there's also an environmental impact for idling cars, idling trucks. And there's a lot of gasoline, all these things go into that people don't think about when they're sitting there, and the cost of those goods as well.
Yeah. So if you look at that, you can tell based on these calculations how many hours we have of idling vehicles there. And you can break that down. We have the data, so we know which are personal vehicles and which are, commercial vehicles. So you can calculate that even in gasoline and diesel. We have a calculation that there would be 55,895 gallons of gasoline saved annually and 11,056 gallons of diesel saved annually. You can look at the CO2 that's produced by idling at the crossing, 609.29 metric tons. That's a cost of $54 a metric ton. So the value of reducing those emissions per year is $32,901.83 estimated based on their calculations.
So in those numbers up above, we talked about the lost time. We didn't talk about the cost of that gasoline and diesel, right? But that's how many gallons. So
that's crazy.
You know what it costs per gallon right now?
Right.
Yeah, that's just wasted gallons sitting there idling.
Yep.
Right. And I think something else that we looked at during this process, and is something that we didn't dive into as deeply in previous applications. You mentioned that we had public input throughout the process, and then we included groups that would be impacted by this, residents of that area that are close, business owners in the community. And we also looked at kind of real world stories to make it real. Mayor Barton mentioned everyone that has a train through their town is inconvenienced at some point, but how can we make that human and make it real? We talked about the resident that talked about trying to get in her wheelchair across to the pharmacy to pick up meds and got stuck on the tracks. We talked about, the pedestrian fatality on Halloween, and how you have all these people kind of frustrated and angry and trying to get through town. And we have all of these pedestrians, most of which are children, on Halloween night, and the safety of that situation. We talked about impact on schools if we have students on buses stuck in that traffic. And that's one thing, but also, what's the cost? How do you calculate the cost of missed instruction, or if those kids are missing breakfast at school, or what those impacts are? We talked about just there are impacts that are even outside of that data that we collected that we were able to present to them by including that public input and hearing real stories of real people and how it impact all of the community.
We included a quote from one of the public sessions that I thought was really good. This is what a member of the public said in one of our meetings. Stop trains cause an atmosphere downtown that is supercharged with panic, speed, anger, and frustration.
Yeah.
Bingo.
It is.
That's exactly what happens.
It is, and how many calls do you get when the train is stopped here in your office with
those
people
are
who are
not
angry?
Good days to work in the mayor's office. Ask anybody.
Yes.
People come in, they're angry. They call, they're angry. It's and last week we had the blockage, and one of the spinoffs of this is that people are upset, and so they're trying to get around, and then they end up in the neighborhoods going probably a little more fast than they should,
or the wrong way down one-way streets.
Or the wrong way down one-way streets, and so we've had to. The neighborhoods are asking for increased patrol and police presence when that happens, and then and people are upset because that's happening. I mean, it's a ripple effect on every level. And it is. I mean, people start to panic and they get upset and they get angry, and they, I'll even see people with the lights that come on a train's coming, they're immediately turning around and going another way. I'm
Yes.
thinking, well, odds are it's going to be 2 or 3 minutes
Right.
or 5 minutes, whatever, you don't know. And people automatically, they're just in panic mode when they see a train coming. So yeah, it does create an environment that just gets people all worked up for sure.
It
And
does.
if you ever want to come sit in the mayor's office when there's a train blocking, let me know.
Yes.
We'll let you answer the phone. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, this is huge for our community, but what are the next steps? What do we do now that it's funded? What do we do now?
Well, the first thing that we have to do is we have to attend the webinar so that we get all of the instructions on how we can move forward. But really, we have to hit the ground running. We have to get a consultant on board that can, help walk us through the process and help get us through. A lot of this is very technical information now at this stage. We've done all of the easy collection that we can do with the data and the public input, but now we need to bring in the experts. We have to get somebody on board to help us move forward and put together all of the study that we have to do and be able to draw up the plans.
And we're not doing this because we just want to sit around and have studies.
Right.
Trust me, we have a lot of stuff to do,
Yes.
but this is what prepares us to get that next level of funding for construction, hopefully.
Okay. And what steps can our motorists and community take when, we're working through this
Excellent
process?
question, Sarah. I'm glad you thought of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
What can people do in the
What
interim?
can people do?
Yeah. Well, it's just being aware. I think that's the key, and be patient when there is a train. First of all, be aware of the possibilities. There are certain times of the day that it's more at risk, right? I don't go down Market Street very often because I just don't want to deal with that. If you can find other routes, but if you see that that's happening, seek an alternate route. Stay out of the area when we post. We try to always post when there's a blockage that's extended. Just to go around and stay out of the downtown. Don't put yourself in that traffic jam. And then if you do get caught in it, just be patient. And you'll work your way through. If you're in a car, you'll be able to work your way through. It's just going to cost you some time. And lastly, be patient with us. We're working on it.
Yes.
Yes. Have been for a long time, and it's just gotten to a new level.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Well, is there anything else that you all want to add?
I don't think so. Just thank everybody for their patience, and just remind everybody this is not going to happen overnight. So
Right.
I know we're going to get the questions, in another month. Like, I haven't seen anything happen. It's going to take a while. This is a very large project. Probably I don't know. It's going to be the biggest project we've ever tackled in Crawfordsville yet. We've done some pretty big ones recently, but this is pretty big. If you think about it going all the way, if it goes through construction, it will change the look of that area. And there's a lot involved in doing that, a lot of infrastructure involved in doing that, right? You don't just move a street. You've got everything under it. You got everything beside it. You got everything over it. You got a lot of pieces there. And I've had a couple of people say to me, well, we really don't want the look of that area to change. Well, you can't have both. I'm just going to be bluntly honest here. Either you fix this problem and the area changes, or you don't fix this problem and you live with it the way it is. So that's the decision that's before us.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you all for listening to our special release episode.
Yes. Breaking news.
Breaking news in Crawfordsville. And stay tuned for our regular episodes and more information to this. For this will
be in our general update every time for sure.
So keep listening, and we'll continue to update, in our general update podcast, and then on our social media and on our website. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you for our regular episode next week. Make sure you hit the subscribe button on this podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you aren't already, follow us on Facebook at City of Crawfordsville Official, on Twitter at City of Seville, and on Instagram at City of Crawfordsville. We hope you have a wonderful day and can't wait for you to join us next week.